Hi, this is Kathy McBreen. I'm the president of Millionaire Corner, and I am excited today to talk with Liz Weston. Liz is one of the foremost journalists in the financial media today. She has been part of a team that won a Pulitzer Prize. She's also a certified financial planner, which is unlike most journalists who are in this area. She really understands what she's talking about. Liz wrote a book called Your Credit Score, which was very, very popular and was a national bestseller. And now she's introducing a book called Deal with Your Debt. And we're really excited to have her. Liz has been on CNBC. She writes a weekly or monthly column for the Los Angeles Times. She's been on Dr. Phil, and she's been on the Today Show. So I'd really like to introduce you and welcome Liz Weston. So we hear a lot of debate back and forth whether you should push your kids to go to college if they're going to have to take on debt, or whether they're better off maybe going for 2 years and then working, or whatever might work for a particular family. Tell me your opinion about student loan debt and whether in the end is the college degree that they may get worth it.
One thing people need to understand is that there is a growing divide in our society. This is something economists have been talking about for a while. The short version is that a college education is very worthwhile. The issue is that you don't want to overdose on student loan debt. And that's where we've got the situation where you have people spending tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars for an undergraduate degree when it may not make financial sense. So what we need is families to be sensible about this decision, to get a college education that they can actually afford. I would love it if people would only use federal student loans to fund their college education, because, well, for one thing, it's very limited. There's only about $31,000 or $33,000 you can get in total for an undergraduate education. You can get more for graduate school, but as I said, this is very flexible loan debt. This is very it has a lot of consumer protection, so it's not scary. What happens that really gets kids in trouble is when they have to borrow or think they have to borrow more, and they wind up with a lot of private student loan debt with variable rates and not so many consumer protections. That's when they really get into trouble. So in general, what I would tell people is try not to borrow more for an education than you expect to make your first year out of school. It's a general rule of thumb, but it can put some limits on it. And if you can't manage that, if you would have to borrow more, then think about ways to get the college cost down. Going to community college for 2 years before transferring to a 4-year institution can be a really good plan. Now, that's harder to do, because the kid has to be pretty motivated to get through community college. But, assuming they do that, they can save a lot of money. And it's the 4-year institution that's on your diploma. Nobody ever has to know that you went to a 2-year school. Right. Also, looking for schools where you are in the top 25% of the scores, and that's easy to find online what their scores are. That makes you a more desirable candidate, and you can get more, financial aid. But I really caution parents, don't depend on a lot of financial aid. I hear parents say, oh, I don't want to save because that'll reduce my kids' chances for getting financial aid. Well, in those circumstances, just use the phrase tremendous debt instead of financial aid, because that's what you're saying. Most financial aid is loans. So when you're saying, I don't want to save because I don't want to hurt my chances of my kid getting financial aid, you're saying, I don't want to hurt my kid's chances of getting tremendous debt. So you want to make sure that you're saving when you can, because really the college financial aid formulas expect you to save. If you have the income to do so, they're going to expect you've been saving all along. If you don't, you're going to be shocked at what your family expected contribution is. So don't just assume that scholarships will take care of it. Most of the time, what your kid will be getting is loans.
What do you think about the value of one of the brand name schools? Is it to go into more debt to have a degree from, say, Harvard than from, I don't know, Ohio State? I hope I didn't offend Ohio State. But, was that worth it?
Here's the deal. There was an Ivy League professor that set out to prove that an Ivy League education had economic benefits. What he found was that if your kid can get accepted to an Ivy League school, but went elsewhere, they do just as well economically as the kids who go to the Ivy League schools. Now, there are some who would argue in certain professions, say investment banking, the power of the connections, outweighs everything else. So, and I think if you did get a kid into the Ivy League, a lot of those schools are very generous with financial aid, even for families making $180,000 a year or in that neighborhood. So, if you can get your kid in there, take a look at the possibilities. But the reality is, for most kids, they're not going to get in there. And what they do instead is they might reach for a private school education with a name that sounds good. Well, they may not wind up with as generous a financial aid package. So you really have to weigh these things. In general, you want to get a college education you can afford and not bankrupt your family on one you can't. That's a fairly simple concept. But when it comes to your kid and when it comes to, their dream school, a lot of times that's hard to keep in mind. You don't want a kid who's got six-figure student loan debt for undergraduate education. You want a situation where you can never retire because of what you signed up for in terms of parental loans.
Your thoughts have been very helpful today, and we really believe our readers and our listeners will have learned a lot. Thank you so much for being with us today.